In this episode, we're going to be talking about happiness and how to create more of it.
Welcome to Thriving Launch with Louise Congdon and Kamala Chambers, the show for heart-centered entrepreneurs who want it all.
5 days a week, we bring you different segments to inspire you to live a life of freedom. We interview the leading experts in the field of business, health, and love. Be sure to check out Training Tuesdays, where we give you a clear action plan to grow your own business.
Do you have a product or service that you would like to sell online? Or maybe you've been thinking about it, but you're reserved to do it because you need a website, you need complicated systems, and you need to spend money? Well, I've created a completely free course that teaches you how to use Facebook in a purely organic way. This means no ads and no money are needed. You can use Facebook completely free. So head on over to thrivinglaunch.com, opt into my Profit from Social Media course. I'm going to teach you the free methods to using Facebook to make money today. On today's episode, we've brought for you Gretchen Rubin, New York Times bestselling author, happiness project creator. Gretchen Rubin joins us today for Thriving Launch to discuss how we can have more happiness and what is a happiness project. Welcome, Gretchen. Great to have you here.
I'm very happy to be talking to you.
So, I recently read your book, The Happiness Project, and I loved it. I loved your way of describing things like a clear shelf. And I'm thinking about the audience here. First, let's dive into what is a happiness project and then we'll go into what impact and how people can start their own happiness project. What is a happiness project?
Well, I decided that I was going to spend a year thinking about my happiness because I'd had this realization that when I thought, well, what do I want from life anyway? I realized that I wanted to be happy, but I didn't spend any time thinking about whether I was happy or if I could be happier. So I decided to take a year because a year felt like long enough to make real change, but short enough to be kind of manageable. And I identified 12 elements in my life where I thought I could make improvements for my happiness. So I wanted a theme for every month. And then each month I found, 3, 4, 5 concrete manageable resolutions that I thought would help me make progress in that area. So maybe it was vitality, or maybe it was friendships, or maybe it was marriage or parenthood or whatever it might be. And to see if I made these changes, which were very small changes, things that didn't take a lot of time, energy, or money, things I just could do as part of my ordinary day. I wanted to see if I could actually make myself happier.
One of the things I love about your happiness project is in your book, you put it as, I wanted to change my life without changing my life by finding more happiness in my own kitchen.
Yeah, I love radical happiness projects, like when Elizabeth Gilbert went to all those foreign countries and, the guy who gives up the internet for a year or whatever, Thoreau moving to Walden Pond. I love reading about that, but that's not the kind of happiness project that I wanted. I wanted something that was just part of the natural order of my life. And part of it is, I didn't really want a big adventure. And even if I'd wanted a big adventure, I really couldn't take a big adventure. I had 2 little kids, my work, my marriage, my responsibilities. Like I couldn't really go off and do something drastic, but I didn't even really want to do something drastic. I really wanted to do something as part of my ordinary routine.
Well, I love that your focus was on happiness. And since our audience are people looking for lasting love and connection, I'm really curious how that affected your relationships or how you feel incorporating a happiness project into your life can help your relationship.
Well, one of the things that people often say to me is they're like, well, I want to do a happiness project, but my sweetheart is not interested in doing it. And the fact is, mine wasn't either. My husband is a wonderful guy and I love him, with all my heart, but this is not the kind of thing this isn't the way he goes about his life. And so it would have been a waste and a frustration for me to try to get him on board. I've heard of married couples or couples doing happiness projects together, and I think that would be fantastic. But the fact that your sweetheart is not interested in doing it with you does not mean that you can't do it or that it's not going to make a difference in your relationship. Because what I found is that when the only person that we can change is ourselves. And that's frustrating because sometimes you think, well, I would be happier if somebody else would behave properly and think of a bunch of things for that person to do. But you can't make somebody change. You can only change yourself. But what I found is that when I changed, my relationship changed. And when I changed, the atmosphere of my household changed. So I was able to bring about changes in my relationships, in my marriage, in my relationships with my children, just by working on myself. So even though you can't actually change people, you can change a dynamic.
And that really leads into habits. I know that that's your new focus right now.
Yes.
And you have a new book out on habits. And how do you feel habits affect our relationships?
Well, it's interesting because one of the habits that I formed, and I write about this in Better Than Before, is the habit of kissing my husband every morning and kissing him every night. And some people scoff at this and they're like, well, that's just so fake. And like kissing is supposed to be spontaneous and heartfelt. And if you've got it on the calendar, like that's just meaningless. But what I found in my own experience is like, if something's not on the calendar, it doesn't get done. If something's important to me, it had better have its own slot. And by doing something like making a habit of it, I make sure that it gets done. Because one of the things that's freeing and energizing about habits is we don't have to use decisions. We don't have to use our self-control. We just do something automatically. So every morning, I don't think like, oh, should I kiss my husband before I get out of bed? No, I just always kiss him. That's just my habit. And the fact is you're happier in a relationship when there's more kissing. I mean, it maybe even if it's a habit, but I just feel more tender and affectionate when I'm behaving in a tender and affectionate way. And so I think there really is room to use habits to make sure that the behaviors that help us connect with other people and help us behave in a thoughtful, loving, attentive way actually happen. Because if you wait for the thought to occur to you, you just might not think of it for 2-3 months, whereas if it's a habit, then it just happens automatically.
I'm a really big believer in the research around reprogramming ourselves and programming ourselves with our habits, with our thought processes, and how we can really change how our constitution, how we view the world, how our nervous system responds and all of that. And what are your thoughts on how habits can kind of help us to feel more relaxed or more at ease, or the opposite?
Well, one of the interesting things about habits, and this is a good thing and a bad thing at once, is that habits tend to deaden feeling. So if you feel positive feelings, it's going to kind of deaden that. Like if the first time you have that morning cup of coffee, it's amazing. But as it becomes a habit, you experience it less and less intensely. So you get less pleasure from it. On the other hand, if there's something that's upsetting to you or makes you feel anxious or angry, as you become it becomes more of a habit, that's going to deaden your experience. So like if there's something that makes you anxious, by making it into a habit, you're going to soothe your feelings. You're going to become more at ease with whatever that habit is. So that's one way that habits can change our emotional response to something. But also, a lot of times we want ourselves to do something. We want to have something incorporated into our lives. And we become very frustrated when we're not doing it. And one of the ways that you can get yourself to do it is like really work on making it into a habit. And then, if you can wear yourself out every single day. Should I go to the gym today, tomorrow? It's my birthday. My foot hurt. It's too cold. I'm going to go tomorrow. The gym is a little bit too far away. I'm going to go later in the day. You could spend hours in that kind of thinking and never get to the gym. Or you could just be like, it's Monday, I go to the gym first thing. And then you just go. There's no decisions. There's no self-control. It just happens automatically. And that preserves a lot of your energy that then you can direct to other things that are a lot more interesting and more demanding than something like, should you go to the gym? And so that's where I feel like habits can really help us have the lives that we want, because they make these behaviors automatic. And so we don't have to wear ourselves out figuring out whether or not we're going to do something.
As you were talking, and I was thinking I've used all those excuses for why I haven't gone to the gym yet.
Right. Oh, of everything I wrote about in Better Than Before, my favorite chapter was the chapter called The Strategy of Loophole Spotting, because I identified the 21 strategies that we can use to make or break our habits. And we use the same habits. We use the same strategies, whether we're making them or breaking them. That doesn't matter. But the funniest strategy is the strategy of loophole spotting, because I identified 10 categories of loopholes that we use when we're trying to to explain, justify why we're not keeping a good habit. And, because we're like a cell phone searching for a signal. It's like, oh, there's got to be a reason why I'm off the hook. Oh, wait, I just thought of one. Life's too short not to eat a brownie. Oh, I just thought of that. That's the false self-actualization loophole, or there's the tomorrow loophole. It doesn't matter what I do today because tomorrow I'm going to be so good. And then there's the concern for others loophole, which is, oh, I have to eat this because my host will feel bad if I don't partake. And there's these 10 categories, and we're so good. Like, we can think of a loophole for any situation. And they're so imaginative and they are so hilarious. I loved cataloging the loopholes.
So when we think about some of the loopholes that we're using, what are some of the ways that we can spot those patterns and then say, you know what, I don't want to enter into this loophole. I'm going to go to the gym. Or, in your happiness project, you talked about not nagging with your husband,
right.
And some of the ways that we trick ourselves into why we think nagging or trying to get that gold star is okay. When we're talking about habits, because really, to me, a lot of your work centers around habits, whether it's through the Happiness Project or your new book.
Yes.
What are some of the ways that we can change some of those habits and catch those loopholes that we're using?
Well, you spotted the pattern before I did, because I had the Happiness Project and Happier at Home. And before I realized that habits was such a central thing, that took me a long time to realize. So you figured that out right away. I think a lot of it is sheer mindfulness. I think a lot of it is just recognizing what we're doing. And it sounds so obvious, but it's like, if you catch yourself saying, oh, you know what? I'm at this party right now and I am invoking the one coin loophole right now, and just having a name for it and realizing that it is a loophole. A lot of times will help people say, like, oh, I'm not going to do it. The one coin loophole is when you say, like, that because it's like, does one coin make a man rich? No, but if you add one coin and one coin and one coin, at some point you say a man is rich. So it's like, people say to themselves, like, what's the point of going to the gym? What's one trip to the gym? What's one brownie? What's one glass of wine? It's insignificant. That's true. It is insignificant. But the only way you form the habit of going to the gym is one time plus one time plus one time. So the one coin loophole is to say, well, it doesn't matter what I do this time because it's just this one time. Why should I wear my helmet today? What are the chances I'm going to get in an accident today? Practically none, right? But it's only by wearing your helmet every single day that you protect yourself. So I think a lot, and the same thing with nagging. It's like, once you realize this is what I'm doing, and also, by the way, it does not work. It isn't effective. And it's just a habit that you get in. Like, I'm just going to keep repeating myself, and I'm just going to keep insisting that things be done on my schedule. And the person is it working? No, it's not working. So give it up. Try something else. Figure out ways to work around it. And what I found for myself, and I've heard this from so many people, is that when you think about how to get out of the habit of nagging, you really find much better solutions. Like you writing a note, because then you don't have somebody's nagging voice in your ear, but a note is actually a much more effective reminder. Or saying to yourself, things don't need to be done on my schedule. I want this to be done right away. It doesn't need to be done right away. Somebody else who's going to do this, if they're going to do the work, they can choose how to do it on their own schedule. If I want it to be done now, I have to do it now. That's the choice. So this mindfully understanding a pattern then allows you to reset the pattern.
When I was reading through your Happiness Project, one of the things you talked about is having checklists. How often were you checking your checklist? I mean, was it like in the morning and before you went to bed? Because that's one of the hardest things when we're talking about changing some aspect of our lives is we have built-in patterns. Like, I'm used to just driving home a certain route, and then when I move, I tend to drive to my old house. And then when I'm there, I go, and I'm there, I'm at my old house. That doesn't work so well when we're thinking about like habits that are deeply ingrained, like nagging or other things that we're doing. Like, how are you using your checklist?
Well, one of the things that I use my checklist quite a lot because I sort of enjoy it when I was writing the Happiness Project. But one of the things that I began to understand over time, and this was extremely important when I was writing Better Than Before, was one of the things that often happened when I would talk to people about the Happiness Project or Happier at Home is they would say, but how did you get yourself to stick to doing all those things? Like, how did you actually follow through? Was it the resolution chart? Was it these checklists? Like, how did you actually make yourself do it? And the fact is I use those checklists, but and I really enjoyed using them, and I did use them, but they weren't so crucial. And I didn't have trouble keeping them. And as I was writing about habits, it became clearer and clearer to me, which is something that is almost never discussed, which is that people have really different aptitude for forming habits and really different attitude towards habits. And the fact is, I find it pretty easy to form a habit, and I feel very positively towards habits. And neither one of those things is universally true. And one of the things that I do in Better Than Before is I identify 4 tendencies. I divide all of humanity into 4 tendencies. And while I began writing that book thinking I was pretty typical when it came to habit formation, as I was writing the book and came up with this framework, I realized actually I'm not typical. I'm part of the freaky fringe. And I really had to rewrite like half the book once I understood I am not typical. I am an extreme personality, which, by the way, came as a surprise to no one but me. But I didn't understand that about myself. And so one of the things that led me to be interested in habits was that so many people were like, but how did you get yourself to do these things? And I was like, well, that wasn't really the hard part. But I realized actually for a lot of people, that is the hard part. The follow through is the hard part. And so that actually Better Than Before, that's all it's about is what are these 21 strategies? And depending on who you are and what you're like, different ones will work better for you or will be less effective. And each one of us sort of has to pick and choose the ones that work for us, because just because something works for you doesn't mean that it's going to work for me, or just because something works for my husband doesn't mean it's going to work for me. And sometimes that can lead to a lot of conflict because, one member of a relationship thinks that, oh, this is the right way to do it. Let's do it this way. And the other person's like, no, my way is the right way. And they don't understand.
I'm really curious, what is a checklist? Because for anyone who hasn't read your books, what is a checklist and how do we use it like in a relationship?
No, well, I think I call it a resolution chart, which is just that I wrote down every resolution that I wanted to keep, and I checked off every night whether I did it or not. So it's just like a matter of, and in my terminology, I would say that's using the strategy of monitoring to see whether you're keeping a habit, which is just paying attention to whether or not you are keeping a habit. And the fact about monitoring is that we all tend to do a better job of something when we monitor it. Even something like making a loving comment to your spouse. Check that off, like monitor that habit. Are you doing that? Yes, you are. And as we monitor something, we tend to do a better job. And so if you are keeping track of something, anything that's important to you, sometimes people think, well, this is too important or this is too transcendent to be monitored. Well, if it matters to you, if it counts to you, figure out a way to count it. I want to have quality time with my daughter. Well, every week I try to spend 2 hours with her by herself doing something fun. I can check that off or not. That's a quantifiable thing that I can actually measure. And I think it's really helpful not to have vague aims like I want to be more present in the moment. I want to have more meaningful relationships. How does that translate into actual action that you can measure? Because then you really know what you're expecting from yourself. So that's how I use checklists and there's on my website, GretchenRubin.com. There is a sample of my resolution chart and a blank template for anybody who wants to sort of see how I used it and wants to fill in one for themselves. Because I do think that this really does help people change a behavior.
So we can go to that site and then download the checklist and fill it in. If you have like a relationship goal, you can go there and just fill in the action steps that you want to take every day or weekly for the health of your relationship, right?
Absolutely. No, and I think that, and there might be, you might have you might have many, many things that you want to do, little actions that you want to take every day that you want to stay on top of to see if you're really doing them. Because for a lot of things, what we do every day matters more than what we do once in a while. And so like a big gift on Valentine's Day is going to be less important than being loving in a smaller way the other days of the year, and so I think it's helpful to think about what you can do that'll strengthen, like a habit that we have in our house now, not just for me and my husband, for my children too, but it's probably most important for my husband and me, is every time somebody comes and goes from the apartment, they get a big hello and goodbye. Because I realized that we were sort of just vaguely acknowledging each other coming and going. And that was sort of a bad feeling. And so now it's like, if you walk in, like if my husband walks in at the end of the day, like I put down my book, I get up out of my chair and I go to him and say, and give him a hug and say, hello, how was your day? Instead of just like barely lifting my eyes from the page and grunting out, which is what I used to do until I realized that wasn't the habit that I wanted. And, it makes a big difference. It doesn't take a lot of time, energy, or money, but this habit of really acknowledging when people come and go, it just makes you feel like you really matter to people, that they really care about seeing you leave and seeing you come back, and that they really care about you and your experience and want to connect with you every time they see you. And it is surprising to me what a difference that made in the atmosphere of my home. Again, it's not a big deal. It's not hard to do.
We have somebody in our house who is incredible at every time we come home, he just makes us feel like
your dog, right?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah,
exactly. But
that's what everybody says. It's like, I get the big greeting from my dog. And then my family members, it's like they could care less. Like, that's not good. You don't want to get a bigger greeting from your dog than from the love of your life. You want at least as good, if not better. It's
hard to compete with him, though.
That's true. That's true. The wriggling, yes, and the tail wagging, yeah, that's true.
But there is a lot to be said about I've watched him in the way that he makes me feel special, and thought, okay, if I just applied that more often to the people in my life, I mean, I could be transferring that same feeling that he gives me to other people. So that's a great little, thing. And that's something that we definitely teach in our classes with couples is a hug and a kiss that's a little longer and more special than the other hugs or kisses when you greet each other or when you say goodbye to each other.
Yeah. Well, and then one of the things that struck me was the research that shows that married couples treat each other with less consideration than they treat friends or even strangers. So the person that you treat with the least consideration is the person who's like, your soulmate. So one of the habits that I try to cultivate is to treat my husband with the same consideration that I would treat somebody else. So like, we have friends over and I'm like, oh, can I get you something to drink? I said to my husband, can I get you something to drink? Or doing little things, trying to, this is such a dumb example, but, like I said to my husband, oh, I'm going to the drugstore. Do you need anything from the drugstore? It's a tiny thing and it doesn't take any extra effort, but it's just that little bit like, hey, I'm just thinking, is there anything I can do to make your life a little easier? Even if you don't need something from the drugstore, it's nice to be asked, but I really had to cultivate that habit in myself. I have to say, I was not in the habit of doing that. I'm kind of like, if you need something from the drugstore, pick it up on your way home. It's not a big deal, but it's like, what? Say, hey, you need some toothpaste? Okay, whatever.
So Gretchen, one of the things that you did really well in the Happiness Project is you created a theme for the month, because I know that when I create my little transformation checklist, I have a checklist of errands I need to do and things that I need to do for the week and things that I want to change. And before I know it, that checklist is it's hard enough for me to even want to go look at those checklists. That's another habit in itself. And one of the things,
every checklist should include something that can be done in the first 5 minutes for the morale boosting purposes, like you say, because they can become quite overwhelming. Yes.
So my thing that I really liked about you was that you chose a theme, because have you come across this when people are deciding to change habits, they write this long list, be more kind and stop nagging and clean the house. And next thing you know, there's 1,000 things and you're like, oh my God, I'm just so screwed up.
Yeah. No, I think it's helpful my happiness project was it was incredibly thorough, and I did a million things, and it was sort of like, I do a million things, so you don't have to, you can just pick and choose a few. And I think it is really helpful for people to sort of think well, where do I want to start? What are a few things? But be more kind. That's a great example of that. That is very vague. It's a great aim, but what does it mean to be more kind? How would that actually translate into action? Is that I'm going to say hello to every person I know when I drop off off my child at school? Does it mean I'm going to yield when people are trying to merge into traffic? Does it mean I'm going to exchange a few words with every sales clerk? Like, what does that actually mean? Because just be more kind. You come to the end of your day and you're like, well, was I more kind? Hard to say. Or maybe you remember one kind thing that you did and you're like, oh my gosh, I was kind all day, because you remember the one kind thing. So it's better to think of like, well, what are the specific actions that you could turn, at best, you could turn into habits? And start from the beginning. Now, one of the things I talk about in Better Than Before, and I certainly saw this in the Happiness Project and Happier at Home, though I hadn't really analyzed it properly, was that there's certain habits that are foundational to other good habits. And these are habits like, if you're going to start anywhere, these are really good places to start, because they're going to make it easier to do everything else. One is eating and drinking, like not letting yourself get too hungry, because when people are hungry, then their self-command drops. And that's when you're irritable, you lose your sense of perspective and your sense of humor, and also like you skip breakfast, you skip lunch, and then like you eat a bunch of junk at dinner time, then you feel bad. And what I found is that when I feel bad, I act in a bad way, and then I feel terrible and guilty about the fact that I just snapped at my children or snapped at my husband. Then I behave worse because I feel terrible. That's not a good thing. Drinking lowers inhibitions. That's part of what's fun about it. So it's not good if you want to exercise self-mastery. Getting some exercise boosts energy. It doesn't deplete energy. So you want to move around. You don't have to train for the marathon. Getting enough did I say sleep? Yeah, sleep. You got to get enough sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, you're going to be just exhausted and drained. And then another thing, weirdly, uncluttering. For a lot of people, outer order contributes to inner calm. And so getting a handle on junk, getting rid of stuff that you don't use or that you don't love or that doesn't fit or that doesn't work or you don't even know what it is, throwing it away, giving it away, getting it in its right place is something that often like makes people feel more energetic and more creative and more loving in a weird way. It seems like getting a crowded coat closet shouldn't make you crabby and irritable with your sweetheart, but it sort of has that effect. And over, people tell me that when they get control over this stuff in their life, they feel more in control of their life generally, and they just feel more cheerful, more loving, more creative, more energetic. Now, obviously, that can be a big source of conflict within relationships, because one person's like, hey, let's spend the weekend cleaning out the house. That sounds like it'd be amazing. I would love to have a clean, orderly house. And the other person's like, are you insane? I've worked all week. I just want to lie around on the couch. I don't want to clean out the basement. And I have a lot of suggestions for how you can handle that kind of situation, because it certainly is something where people have different tolerances for disorder and different senses of like what's the right level of order, and that can be difficult to manage sometimes within relationships.
I really want to reiterate this to everyone, that this is something that you can do right now. And
Yes.
Make a commitment in your relationship. Do a relationship happiness project.
Oh, yes.
And make these lists. Get clear on what it is that you feel is going to make your relationship even better. And you can listen to past interviews that we've put out for other experts, what they say about how to make your relationship better. And all these things that you're saying, Gretchen, about you don't want to be hungry, because you might get crabby. Going to the gym, even that can support your relationship.
Yeah.
So I just invite you as a listener right now to make that commitment to do a relationship happiness project for you and your partner.
Yeah, and on my site, I have these 21-day projects. So it's like for 21 days, you get a reminder, an idea for something you could do. And there's the one that's free. Most of them are $4.95. The relationship challenge is free for people who want to test it. And again, it's just like a quick, easy idea, something to think about every day for 21 days, just to get you thinking like, well, what are the little changes that I could make that are going to get me that more loving relationship that I want? Because again, a lot of times it's not hard. It's just, it just has to occur to you, and so sometimes hearing what worked for other people, like you say, listening to interviews, hearing other people talk about it, it sparks ideas for yourself about changes you could make.
That's great. Are there any other closing thoughts that you want to leave the listeners with?
The thing that I've come to believe most in all my study of happiness and habits is that there are no magic one-size-fits-all solutions, and we all have to find out like what's true for us. We can build a happy life only on the foundation of our own nature, our own habits, our own interests, our own values. And so sometimes in a relationship, the better I understand myself, the better I can understand my husband, because I'm like, I see how he's alike. and I see how he's different from me. And it's not that one of us is right and one of us is wrong, but how do we get to a place so we can both thrive and we can both have this warm, loving relationship? And it's really through self-knowledge that comes. You'd think that being focused on yourself would take you away, but actually, when you understand yourself, you're more able to turn outwards.
You've been listening to the Thriving Launch podcast. For books and resources related to today's episode, make sure to head over to thrivinglaunch.com. We'll see you there.
Be sure to tune into the next episode where we're going to talk with Stephen Kotler about altered states of consciousness and increasing productivity. If you've enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating on iTunes. It helps.